My name is Dana Thornton. I'm 34 years old, and I catered my own mother's 65th birthday party. The party my 5-year-old daughter was banned from. Picture it. 96 guests under the string lights of a white event barn. My mother in pearl earrings, tapping her champagne glass with a spoon. A photographer arranging 2 rows of chairs in front of a backdrop, calling for immediate family only. And my mother turning to me, in front of her pastor, her garden club, and my sister's wealthy future in-laws, sweet as frosting. "You can wait in the kitchen, honey. This part is just for family." I looked at her. I looked at that backdrop with no room in it for my daughter. And I untied my apron. What I said next made my mother, my father, and my sister go pale in front of every guest they had spent months trying to impress. 96 people went completely silent. But that moment only makes sense if I take you back 3 weeks, to a folder I was never supposed to see. Welcome back to Calm Drama Stories, where quiet people finally say the things families pretend not to hear. If you've ever been the one who gives the most and gets invited the least, this story is for you. Drop a comment telling me where you're listening from, and subscribe, because the ending of this one is worth staying for. 3 weeks before that party, I was in my commercial kitchen at 6 in the morning, rolling out 200 puff pastry pinwheels for somebody else's wedding. My daughter Lily sat on a step stool beside me, dusting flour over everything within reach, and singing a song from preschool with most of the words wrong. She's 5. She sings loud, she runs everywhere, and she asks strangers about their dogs. Some people call that wild. I call it being alive. I run a small catering company in Hartwell, Ohio, called Thornton Table. I started it 9 years ago with a used oven, a borrowed van, and a dented tin recipe box that belonged to my grandmother Ruth. That box sits on a shelf above my prep station like other people keep a Bible. Grandma Ruth taught me to cook in the kitchen of her lake house, back when I was small enough to need a chair to reach the counter. She used to say, "Feed people like you mean it, Dana girl." I've been a widow for 3 years. My husband Tom died in a car accident on Route 9 when Lily was 2, and I kept us afloat with that recipe box, a bank loan, and more sheet pans than sleep. We live in a little blue bungalow that Tom and I bought together, 12 minutes from my parents' house on Maple Street. It's not a big life, but it's ours, and I built it with my own 2 hands, and every dish that leaves my kitchen has my grandmother somewhere in it. That morning, Lily had just talked me into letting her crimp 1 pie crust, badly, gloriously, when my phone rang against the flour bin. My mother's name lit up the screen. I answered with one shoulder, hands still in dough. "Dana, sweetheart," she said, in the voice she saves for big asks. "I need you Saturday. Family meeting. It's important." Saturday, my parents' dining room smelled like lemon polish and ambition. My mother, Carol, had a white binder open on the table, the kind with printed tabs. My sister Brooke, 37, sat beside her reviewing paint chips like a judge reviewing evidence. My father, Frank, poured coffee and looked mostly at the window. "I'm turning 65 once," Mom announced, "and we are doing it properly." Properly meant the orchard house, the white event barn out past the county line. 90 guests, string lights, a 4-course menu built from Grandma Ruth's recipes, my grandmother's ham, her rolls, her apple stack cake. Mom flipped the binder toward me, tapped the menu tab with 1 manicured nail, and smiled. "And of course you'll do the food, sweetheart. That can be your gift." Not a question, a delivery notification. I did the math in my head the way other women count to 10. 90 covers, plated, staffed, 4 courses. That's not a gift. That's a small car. But I'd been feeding this family for 9 years. Every Christmas, every Easter, every funeral, and the sentence "you'll do the food" had stopped surprising me sometime around year 4. So I said what I always said. "Send me the guest list." Brooke slid a paint chip across the table without looking up. "The napkins should be this ivory. Sandra Whitfield hates bright white." Sandra Whitfield is Brooke's future mother-in-law, and I'll get to the Whitfields. Believe me. Mom beamed at both of us like a general whose army had saluted. Then she turned to the last tab in the binder, the one labeled photography, and her smile did something I didn't have a name for yet. It tightened at the corners, like a lid going on a jar. "Which brings me," she said, "to the delicate part." My father set down the coffee pot very quietly, the way a man does when he already knows what's coming. "We've hired a professional photographer for the whole afternoon," Mom said. "Miller and Lane, the good studio. Everything has to be perfect." She straightened the binder so its edge lined up with the table. "Which is why Lily isn't coming." I honestly thought I'd misheard her. I asked her to say it again, and she did. Slower, the way you talk to a caterer who's behind on canapés. "Lily is not coming to the party. She's too wild. She'll ruin the photos." Just like that. My daughter, her only granddaughter on my side, banned from a family birthday party like a dog from a wedding. Brooke studied her nails. Dad looked out at the tomato stakes in the yard. Nobody said a word in Lily's defense, and the silence had a rehearsed quality, like they'd already held this vote without me. "She's 5, I said. "She's a child, not a raccoon." Mom waved her hand as if swatting the point out of the air. "Don't make it a thing, Dana. It's one afternoon. She won't even remember." Then she moved on to florals, because in my mother's world, a banned grandchild and a hydrangea order carry roughly equal weight. I stood up. I picked up my jacket. My hands were shaking, and I hated that they were shaking. "Then you'll need a different caterer," I said. "And my mother, I want you to hear this part clearly." My mother smiled. Not an angry smile, a patient one, the smile of a woman who has already read the last page of the book you're just starting. "Sit down, honey," she said. "The contracts are already in your company's name." I stood there with my jacket half on, trying to understand the sentence. Contracts? Plural. Already. My name. Outside, my father's wind chimes went on ringing like nothing had happened, and I sat back down, because I needed to know exactly what my mother had done. Here's what she had done. 2 months earlier, my mother had booked the orchard house, the rental company, and the florist, all under Thornton Table Catering, my business. She'd used my vendor accounts, which she had access to because I'd once let her order flowers through my florist discount for a church luncheon. "They gave us the vendor rate," she said, delighted with herself. "Isn't that clever?" Clever. If I canceled now, the cancellation penalties landed on my company, not hers. In a town the size of Hartwell, I'd also be the caterer who torched 3 local vendors 8 weeks before their biggest Saturday in June. My reputation is my payroll. She knew that. She'd known it when she typed my company's name into those booking forms. I drove home with my knuckles white on the wheel, and by the time I pulled into my own driveway, I had made the first decision, the one that mattered most. Lily was done. Not done with the party, done standing in front of my mother to be graded. No begging grandma to reconsider, no trotting my daughter out for inspection so she could earn a folding chair at the kids' table. Whatever Saturday turned out to be, Lily was going to spend it somewhere she was celebrated, and that was now a closed question. The open question was everything else. That night I called the orchard house to confirm what I already feared. The event coordinator was cheerful. Yes, client of record, Thornton Table Catering. Yes, the deposit had gone through in April on my business card, the one my mother had borrowed the number from. I thanked her and hung up, and stood in my kitchen for a long minute. One thing kept snagging in my head, and it wasn't the money yet. A photographer for the entire afternoon, a ban on one small girl. Since when did my mother care that much about photos? To explain what happened next, I have to tell you about the 9 years first. When Grandma Ruth got too tired to host, the cooking passed to me the way her recipe box did. Quietly, and all at once. I catered my parents' anniversary dinners, Brooke's college graduation party, every Thanksgiving, every Christmas Eve, every Easter ham for a congregation's worth of cousins. When Grandma Ruth died 6 years ago, at 88, I cooked for 140 mourners with tears dripping off my chin, and I never sent anyone a bill. Family discount, my mother called it. The discount was 100%. My husband Tom used to watch me load the van for another free family event and shake his head. "Your family thinks free is your love language," he said once. I laughed it off. He wasn't laughing. And here's the thing. I could afford the groceries. What I couldn't afford, and didn't notice I was paying, was the arithmetic underneath it. That in my family's ledger, my time was worth nothing, my skill was worth nothing, and my presence was a service that came with the venue. Grandma Ruth never treated it that way. She'd sit in my kitchen those last years, wrapped in her cardigan, tasting sauce off a wooden spoon, and she'd say, "Feed people like you mean it, Dana girl." She meant love. My mother heard catering. That night, after the family meeting, after Lily was asleep with her stuffed bear and one sneaker still on, I sat at my desk with a glass of wine I didn't drink. In the drawer was every receipt, order sheet, and invoice file from 9 years of family events, because I keep records the way my mother keeps appearances. I did something I had never once let myself do. I started adding it up. The number was $31,400, 23 events over 9 years, priced at market rate, the same way I'd bill any stranger: food cost, staff, rentals, my time. $31,400. I checked it twice because I'm the kind of woman who checks it twice, and the second pass came out the same, to the dollar. I sat back and looked at the total the way you look at an X-ray. Nothing hurts until somebody shows you the picture. Only once had I ever tried to invoice them. Last spring, for their 40th wedding anniversary party, I'd mailed a bill for groceries only, my labor-free, just the food. My mother arrived at Sunday dinner with the envelope in her purse and cried at the table. Actually cried, dabbing her eyes with the napkin I'd ironed. After the party for my 65th, she'd said, patting my hand, "We'll settle everything up at once, I promise. Write that down if you don't trust your own mother." So I had. I still have the page, her words in my handwriting, and beneath them, because she was performing generosity for the whole table, her actual signature, looping and proud. I found that page again at 11 o'clock that night and clipped it to the front of a manila folder. I want to be clear about what I was doing, because it matters later. I wasn't building a bomb. I was doing what I do for every client who stops paying, organizing the file. Records, not revenge. There's a difference, and the difference is what let me sleep. Before I closed the drawer, an old photograph slid out from between 2 receipts. Christmas, 2 years ago. The whole family laughing in front of my parents' tree. And there I am at the far edge of the frame, half cut off, holding a tray. I looked at that photo for a long time. I'd been out of the picture for years. I just hadn't noticed. Now, the Whitfields. 18 months ago, my sister Brooke got engaged to Grant Whitfield, and my family's entire solar system found a new son. The Whitfields are old money, the kind with a stone gate, a country club, and opinions about ivory versus bright white. Brooke quit her real estate job to plan the wedding. My mother joined Sandra Whitfield's garden club within the season. Dinner conversations stopped being about anybody's actual life and became a long rehearsal for an audience of 2. Sandra and Gordon Whitfield, who, my mother liked to whisper, notice everything. 4 days after the family meeting, Brooke swept into my shop with a leather folio and 6 menu changes. The short ribs were out. Sandra preferred beef tenderloin. The deviled eggs were a little church basement. She wanted a raw bar, like the club does. I wrote it all down like a good vendor while my espresso machine hissed at her on my behalf. Then she got to the real item on her agenda. Day of, could you dress, neutral? The Whitfields notice everything. I looked up from my notepad. I'll be in a white chef coat, Brooke, cooking. Perfect, she said, relieved, as if I'd agreed to be wallpaper. Her fiancé came in behind her carrying a crate of rented glassware, set it down where I pointed, and stole a pinwheel off the cooling rack. These are unbelievable, Grant said, and meant it. I've never managed to dislike Grant. He has the friendly, unexamined decency of a man who's never had to check a price tag or a motive. He sees nothing coming. Ever. At the door, Brooke turned with her hand on the frame, almost as an afterthought. "Oh, Mom told you about Lily, right?" A beat. "Good. It's honestly for the best." The bell over my door jingled behind her, cheerful as ever, and I stood there holding a menu with no short ribs and a brand new question. For the best. Who's best? I made one last honest try at the front door before I started checking the windows. I called my mother that evening with a compromise so reasonable it embarrassed me to say out loud. Lily comes for cake and 1 hour of party, and I take her home before the photography starts. She wouldn't so much as touch a camera. My mother sighed the sigh of a woman beset by unreasonable daughters. The photographer says no children who can't sit still. It's his policy. Then, lowering her voice like we were sharing a confidence. And frankly, Dana, after what she did to Grandma Ruth's gravy boat, I'd think you'd want to keep her home. I stopped stirring the pot in front of me. What she did to what? The gravy boat. Ruth's white one, with the roses. At the engagement brunch. Her voice took on the smooth, polished surface of a story told many times. The child flung herself into the hutch and shattered it. Sandra Whitfield saw the whole aftermath. I've never been so mortified. Here is what I remember about that brunch. 14 months ago, I remember Lily at my elbow on the sun porch for most of it, coloring a paper placemat with 3 broken crayons. I remember hearing something break inside the house. A bright ceramic crack, and the dining room going briefly quiet. And I remember that by the time I came in, it was swept up, and nobody wanted to talk about it. My mother had never once mentioned it since, until it was useful. I got off the phone and stood very still in my kitchen. My daughter is loud. She is not destructive, and she was never near that hutch. Somebody had written Lily into a story that wasn't true, told it to my mother, and let it harden into fact. Which meant the ban wasn't a policy, it was a verdict, and I was about to find out who wrote it. You can't interrogate a 5-year-old, and you shouldn't try. So the next morning, while Lily painted the kitchen table and occasionally the paper on it, I went in sideways. "Hey, Bug, do you remember Grandma's white boat? The little one with the flowers? For gravy?" She didn't even look up from her brush. Aunt Brooke said don't touch, so I colored. "You colored where?" "On the porch with Miss Dot. We counted ladybugs. 14. She held up paint-covered fingers as evidence, which is more documentation than my mother ever asked for. Kids tell the truth in crumbs. You just have to pick them up. Miss Dot is Dot Hensley, 86 years old, my grandmother Ruth's closest friend for 60 years, and she had indeed been at that engagement brunch, parked on the sun porch in her good cardigan. One witness at a time. That's how I do everything. I called my Aunt Elaine first, my father's younger sister, 64, the only member of my family who says true things at regular volume. Elaine remembered the brunch fine. She remembered the crash coming from the dining room while Lily was out on the porch, and she remembered walking in to see Brooke standing at the hutch holding a wad of paper towels. "I didn't see it break," Elaine said, careful as always. "I saw who cleaned it up in a hurry, and it wasn't a 5-year-old. I thanked her and said I needed one more person. "You want Dot?" she said. "Dot doesn't blink." Before I could dial, my phone buzzed with a text from my mother. No greeting, all caps on the first word. "ADD a carving station." The Whitfields had one at the club. I looked at it for a second, typed back noted, and added the screenshot to the folder. Everything went in the folder now. Then I called Dot Hensley and asked if she liked coffee cake, which in Hartwell is how you request testimony. Dot Hensley lives 4 blocks from my shop in a house full of doilies and sharp opinions. She ate 2 slices of my coffee cake, patted her mouth with a paper napkin, and told me exactly what happened at that brunch. In order, like a woman reading minutes into a record. She and Lily had been on the sun porch the whole late morning, counting ladybugs in a jelly jar. Through the doorway, Dot had a clear view of the dining room hutch. She saw my sister Brooke reach past it for her phone, catch the open door with her elbow, and knock Ruth's gravy boat to the floor. She saw Brooke freeze, look around, and start sweeping china into a napkin. "Then she told your mother she'd handle it," Dot said, And the next day your mother's telling the garden club that poor little Lily flung herself into the hutch. Dot leaned forward, and her voice went flinty. That child was on the porch with me counting ladybugs. I told your mother so, to her face, that same week. She sat back. She didn't want it so. I'll tell you the truth. Of everything I learned that month, this one reorganized me the most, and not because of Brooke. Brooke broke a dish and lied. People do that. It's small and it's ugly and it's ordinary. What stopped me cold was my mother. She'd been handed the truth by Ruth's oldest friend, an eyewitness with no reason to lie, and she had set it aside because the lie was more useful. The lie gave her a banned grandchild with a cause. A policy needs a reason. A verdict only needs a story. Driving home, I kept circling one question, the same one from the night of the phone call, only now it had teeth. If the reason was manufactured, the ban was never about Lily. So what was it about? I confronted my sister the way I'd want to be confronted. Privately, calmly, with the facts in a row. I brought her a latte at the bridal boutique where she was between fittings, waited for the seamstress to leave, and told her what Dot saw. Brooke didn't gasp, didn't deny, didn't even set down her phone. She examined me for a moment, the way you'd examine a stain on a dress you're deciding whether to keep. She's 5, Dana. She'll forget the whole thing by Christmas. That's not an answer. It's the only one that matters. She finally put the phone face down, and for a second I saw something almost like strain around her eyes. You have no idea how much is riding on this party. Sandra Whitfield cares about family presentation. Her sister vets people. Dana. She vetted the last fiancé out the door. One chaotic kid in one photo, and suddenly, we're that kind of family. She's not one chaotic kid, I said. She's your niece. And you let a 5-year-old carry your broken dish for 14 months. Brooke's jaw set, and there she was again, my sister, smooth as a showroom floor. The gravy boat was an accident. The story just settled where it settled. I'm not relitigating it weeks before the most important weekend of my life. She checked her watch. A new one, thin and gold. Anyway, after Saturday, none of this will matter. She said it lightly, the way you'd mention weather, but it caught on something as it went past me. Not the wedding. The wedding was a year out. Everybody knew that. After Saturday, meaning the party. What exactly was Saturday going to settle? The seamstress came back with pins in her mouth. Brooke rose for her fitting like a queen for a coronation, and I left carrying an empty latte cup and a phrase I'd be turning over for days. Meanwhile, I did what a sensible woman does when she finds herself locked into contracts she never signed. I tried to unlock them. I went to my bank that Tuesday and asked to have my business card removed as guarantor on the bookings my mother had made. The manager was sympathetic and useless in the way only bank managers can be. Removing a guarantor required signatures from both parties on the reservation, mine and my mother's, plus a 30-day processing window. The party was in 18 days. I asked if there was any faster path. There was not. So I emailed my mother, politely and in writing, asking her to confirm the arrangement and the costs. Who had authorized the bookings? Who was covering what? What I got back was a 4-minute voicemail that never once mentioned money. It mentioned 26 hours of labor, which is how long she was in labor with me, a figure that inflates a little every year like a pension. It mentioned everything she'd sacrificed. It suggested gently that grief had made me transactional. I saved the voicemail to the folder and went to see Megan Price. Megan is my closest friend since 10th grade and a paralegal at the only real law firm in Hartwell. We talk over her kitchen table, which is where most of the justice in this county actually gets drafted. She flipped through my folder. The bookings, the guarantor forms, my mother's handwritten IOU from the anniversary party, and tapped the stack. Keep every receipt, she said. Paper doesn't cry. Then she pointed at one line item on the venue's final walkthrough schedule, faxed to me that morning as client of record. Photographer load in, 1 o'clock. Legacy set plus backdrop. What's a legacy set? Megan asked. I said I didn't know. I said it while something cold walked down the back of my neck, because whatever it was, nobody had mentioned it to the woman paying for the room it would stand in. That Sunday my father showed up at my bungalow unannounced, the way he does, with a toolbox he didn't need, and a flat of tomato seedlings he did. My kitchen faucet had developed a drip only he could hear. While he took the fixture apart, Lily supervised from the counter, handing him washers with surgical importance, and then the two of them went out back to plant the seedlings in the bed Tom built the spring before he died. I watched from the window. My father is 68, a retired mechanic with hands like tree bark, and he taught my daughter to whistle that afternoon. Badly. But she got one clean note out and looked at him like he'd handed her the moon. This is the man I couldn't make sense of. The one who let my mother's verdict stand at every table, and the one on his knees in the dirt, letting a 5-year-old boss him around a garden. He came in for lemonade and stood at my sink, not quite looking at me. "Your mother," he started and stopped. He turned a washer over in his fingers like a coin. "The party's bigger than a birthday, Dana. There's things." He caught himself. The way a man steps back from a ledge he walked to on purpose. Whatever it was folded itself back up inside him. "Just make the ham the way Grandma Ruth did. The whole thing goes easier if the ham's right." He rinsed his glass, patted Lily's head, and left me standing in a kitchen that no longer had a drip but had developed a much bigger leak. My father knew something. He'd carried it to my house along with the seedlings, gotten it as far as the sink, and taken it home again. I didn't push him. I've since spent some nights wondering what would have happened if I had. But you can't open a man like a stuck faucet. And I had a party to cook. Now I have to back up 14 months because you need to know about the $18,000. It started with a phone call from my mother, crying. Real crying, the kind that scared me. Your father's heart. The cardiologist wanted to place a stent. There was a date on the calendar at St. Luke's. There were forms. And there was a gap insurance wouldn't cover. On top of that, the roof over their back bedroom had started coming in during storms. $18,000 would cover both. I want this part on the record. I did not just write a check. A widow with a small business does not have $18,000 of sentiment lying around. I asked for the paperwork, and they gave it to me without a flicker. A real cardiology consult with a real scheduling letter, Frank Thornton, procedure date set. A real roofing estimate from a real local company. I read every page and then I transferred the money and typed the word loan in the memo line, and my mother squeezed my hand and called me her rock. 3 weeks later, the procedure was postponed. The doctor wanted to try medication first, watch and wait. The roof could go another season. Why waste dry weather? I asked follow-up questions. I got smooth answers with medical words in them. And then a wedding season buried me, and grief is a fog, and life moved on the way it does. It wasn't until I was assembling my folder at midnight that I laid the scheduling letter next to my bank statement and finally saw what 14 months of trust had kept me from seeing. The procedure at St. Luke's had been canceled. Not postponed? Canceled? I confirmed it later. 2 days after my money landed in their account. 2 days. Postponed. My foot. Somewhere, $18,000 of mine had gotten up from the table, put on its coat, and walked off to do something else entirely. While I was quietly excavating the past, the present kept sending invoices. The guest list went from 90 to 96. The carving station became a carving station plus a raw bar, like the club does. My mother took to approving canapés over video call, holding her phone so close to each tray that I mostly catered to her left eyeglass lens. 17 days out, I finally said the number out loud. Not the 9-year number, just this party. "Mom, this menu is $11,000 at cost, before staff." There was a pause on the line, and then my mother laughed, light as meringue, and delivered the sentence I want engraved somewhere. "You're the caterer, honey, not the guest of honor. Caterers manage." I looked out my shop window at the van with my grandmother's recipe for a logo, Thornton Table, fed with love, since 2017. And I heard myself answer, in a voice so even it surprised me. "Yes, we do." She took it as agreement and moved on to whether the punch should be pink. It wasn't agreement. It was the sound a lock makes when it decides. Caterers do manage, Mom. We manage budgets and timelines and rooms full of people who don't say thank you. We keep files. We know, to the dollar, what everything costs, including things you've never once thought to price. That afternoon, the venue coordinator called to confirm the following week's final tasting, Whitfield's attending, my mother requesting the good linens, and mentioned in passing that the photographer would drop off his folder for the run of show. Your client of record, she said, breezy. It'll all come to you. I thanked her and stood for a moment with my hand still on the phone. Everything comes to the client of record eventually. The bills, the schedules, and if a distracted assistant slips one manila folder into the wrong stack of papers, other things too. Things with your family's name printed across the top. It arrived on a Wednesday, wedged between a linen invoice and a diagram of table rounds, a manila folder, stamped with the logo of Miller and Lane Photography that I was never supposed to open. But my company's name was on the delivery, and I am the client of record. So I opened it at my prep counter with flowers still on my hands. On top was the run of show. Under it was a single laminated page, and across the top of that page, in confident studio lettering, it said, Thornton Family Legacy Session. Booked by B. Thornton. 14 numbered frames. I read them standing up. Frame 1, Carol and Frank, porch swing. Frame 3, Carol, Frank, Brooke, and Grant in the orchard row. Frame 6, 3 generations, my mother Brooke, and Grant's little nieces borrowed for the shot. Golden hour portraits, a framed heirloom print, 24 by 36. For above the mantel. I read the list twice, the way I check my totals. 14 photographs of my family. My daughter wasn't in a single frame. Neither was I. Not the group shot, not the generations shot, not one. And then, at the bottom, in the photographer's penciled shorthand, 4 small marks that rearranged my entire month. Per B, no D plus L. Per Brooke, no Dana, no Lily. I set the page down on my counter next to 200 cooling pinwheels, and I understood everything at once. The way you understand a joke. Instantly, in the body, before you can explain it. She's too wild. She'll ruin the photos. There were never going to be photos of her. There were never going to be photos of me. The ban wasn't a policy or even a verdict. It was a crop. Somebody had redesigned my family for the camera, and my entire branch had been cut out of the tree. In writing, with initials, like a change order. The whole party was a set, which left one question standing in my quiet kitchen, and it wasn't about photographs anymore. What, exactly, was Saturday really for? Before I tell you what that party was really for, let me ask you something. Have you ever found your name missing from something you paid for? A photo? A guest list? A will? If that's ever happened to you, tell me in the comments. And if you're new here, take 1 second and subscribe, because the folder was only the beginning, and what I found at the county records office is the part my family still wishes I'd never seen. I did not scream, or call my mother, or post anything anywhere. I photocopied every page, returned the originals to the folder, and set the folder in the venue's paperwork stack exactly where it had been left, because the first rule of keeping your head is keeping your evidence boring. Then I called my Aunt Elaine and asked her one question, plainly. Is Saturday about Mom's birthday? There was a long pause on her end, long enough that I could hear her kitchen radio playing hymns. When she finally answered, her voice had lowered into the register she saves for funerals and true things. That party isn't about her birthday, sweetheart. Another pause. Come by after church. Some of it isn't mine to tell over a phone. I said I'd bring coffee cake, and we both pretended that was the reason I'd come. That night, I stood a long time in the doorway of Lily's room. She sleeps like she lives, diagonally, with commitment. One arm flung off the mattress like she's hailing a cab in her dreams. 5 years old, too wild for a photograph, according to people who had never once watched her fall asleep holding a jelly jar with a ladybug in it. Because Miss Dot said ladybugs are good luck, and Lily wanted the luck to be there when she woke up. Standing in that doorway, I felt the shape of the thing I was going to do begin to settle in me, quietly, in order, with receipts. No screaming matches on lawns, no dramatic phone calls for relatives to replay at holidays. I would do this the way I do everything, the way 9 years of thankless tables had trained me to do it. They had taught me to manage. They were about to find out what a caterer manages. But first, I needed Elaine's kitchen, and the part that wasn't hers to tell over a phone. Meanwhile, I had legitimate business at Miller and Lane Photography. As the caterer, I needed backdrop dimensions so my staff wouldn't wheel a dessert cart through the middle of golden hour. That's a real reason, by the way. I've had a bride's cousin back a cake table into a photo booth. You plan around cameras like you plan around fire exits. The studio smelled like new carpet. While the receptionist pulled the floor plan, I made small talk, which in a town like Hartwell is simply how information travels. The legacy session, she confirmed brightly, was their premium package. 3 hours, 2 photographers, the heirloom print for above the mantel. $3,000, and worth every penny. Booked back in February, deposit paid by check. The Thorntons on Maple Street, she said warmly. Lovely family. February. I kept my face pleasant, a skill you develop plating 400 canapes while a mother of the bride critiques your posture. February was 10 months after my $18,000 had gone out to rescue a heart and a roof, and neither had been rescued. A $3,000 deposit paid by check from a household that had cried poor to me across a kitchen table. Whose signature was on that check? I didn't ask. Receptionists confirm bookings. They don't hand you bank records, and I wasn't going to make anyone uncomfortable on my account. But I wrote the date in my folder in the parking lot, and I sat there a minute, doing the quiet arithmetic that had become my second job. My phone rang while I was still holding the pen. Brooke, no hello. The 3-tier cake was out. Sandra found tiers, a little bit prom. It would need to be a naked cake, with fresh flowers. Could I manage that? Of course, I said in my even voice, watching the studio door in my rearview mirror. I can manage that. She hung up without saying thank you. 15 days to Saturday. That evening, Lily was at the kitchen table working on a masterpiece in crayon. Our house, plus a dog we do not own, rendered in optimistic purple. Without looking up, in the offhand way children detonate things, she asked, "Is Grandma mad at me?" I put down the knife I was holding. "Why would you think that, Bug?" "Aunt Brooke said big parties aren't for wild girls." She said it evenly, still coloring, the way kids repeat weather reports from the adult world. No self-pity, just data. She'd overheard it somewhere, or been told it straight. It didn't matter which. It had gotten in. I came around the table and knelt down to her eye level, because some sentences you deliver at eye level, or not at all. "You are not wild," I said. "You're alive. There's a difference, and the people who can't tell the difference are not in charge of you." She considered this with the seriousness of a Supreme Court. "Miss Dot says I'm a firecracker." Miss Dot is correct. Can firecrackers have their own party? And that's when I told her about Saturday, not the part she'd been banned from, which she will learn someday, from me, when she's old enough to hear the whole story. I told her about her party, sprinklers in the backyard, mud officially permitted, her 3 best friends from preschool, and Aunt Elaine bringing ice cream, and hot dogs for lunch with no vegetables of any kind. Her eyes went wide and she abandoned the purple dog mid-leg. "Is it my birthday?" "Nope, it's a just because party." "Because why?" "Because you will not spend that afternoon anywhere near people who grade you, baby. Because she's too wild. She'll ruin the photos is a sentence about their smallness, not yours." Out loud I said, "Because you're mine." She accepted this and returned to her dog. Somewhere across town, my mother was approving linens. I was done applying for a folding chair at her table. Late that night, I spread everything across my desk like a caterer laying out a plated course. The 9-year ledger, $31,400. My mother's handwritten promise from the anniversary dinner, signed with a flourish. The canceled procedure letter beside my bank statement 2 days apart. The photocopied shot list with its penciled crop. Per B. No D+L. And the walkthrough schedule for a legacy set nobody had mentioned to the woman bankrolling it. I sat with my chin in my hand and thought about walking away. Just eating it all, canceling nothing, cooking the party, going home. I costed it out, because that's what I do. Walking away quietly would run me about $49,000, all told, plus penalties if I canceled, plus a lesson delivered to my daughter at 5 years old, that the loud people win and the quiet ones cater. That last line item was the one I couldn't absorb. So I chose the third option, the one nobody in my family would ever see coming from me, because it required no yelling at all. I would cook that party. Not adequately, magnificently. Every dish from Grandma Ruth's tin box, made the way she made it, the best food that barn had ever held. I would fulfill every line of every contract my mother had signed in my name. And then, when the room was full and the glasses were raised, I was going to serve the truth for dessert. Calmly, in order, with copies. But before I could set that table, I needed to know exactly where I stood, legally, to the inch, because women like me don't get to be approximately right. I texted Megan, "Kitchen table, Monday morning, bring your reading glasses." Monday morning, Megan slid my own contracts back across her table, took off those glasses, and said the sentence that changed the whole game. "Dana, you are the client." I'd spent 3 weeks feeling trapped by those contracts. Megan spent 1 weekend reading them and found the door. "Your mother booked everything under Thornton table to dodge the deposits," she said, tapping each document in turn. "Which means, on paper, this is not her party. It's your event. The venue answers to you. The rental company answers to you. The florist answers to you. The photographer's slot exists inside a run of show that you, as client of record, control." She slid the venue agreement across the table and underlined a clause with her finger. "The client sets the program. The client may address guests at the client's event. The client approves, or declines, any charges added after signing." "She built the cage," Megan said. "And then she put your name on the deed to the cage." I sat back. 3 weeks of feeling cornered, and the corner was a throne with my name on it. Then Megan put on her careful voice, the paralegal one. "Now, whatever you're planning for that microphone, if you state facts, and you can paper every fact, there's nothing anyone can do about it. Truth is a complete defense. Don't speculate. Don't diagnose. Don't call anybody a thief. Read documents. You're good at documents." I told her the truth. I wasn't planning to cancel anything, or torch anything, or scream. I was planning to deliver everything. The ham, the rolls, the naked cake with fresh flowers, every contracted item executed in full. "Including," I said, "the bill." Megan grinned at me over her coffee like we were 16 again, and I'd finally talked back to somebody. Then her face changed, the way it does when she's holding a card she wishes she wasn't. She turned her laptop around to face me. "One more thing," she said. "Before you finalize any plans, you should see what got filed at the county recorder's office." On Megan's screen was the county auditor's parcel page, public record, searchable from anybody's kitchen. The lake house at Birch Lake, current owners Frank and Carol Thornton. And beside it, Megan's sticky note. Because in a county like ours, the title office on Court Street books its notary slots through half the law firms in town, and schedulers talk. Quitclaim deed, Thornton to Thornton. Grantee, Brooke E. Thornton. Grandma Ruth's lake house. The kitchen where I learned to cook standing on a chair. The porch where she taught me that you feed people like you mean it. The one place on this earth where I was never once out of frame. My parents inherited it when Ruth died, and now it was sliding, quietly, to my sister. The notary appointment was already on the books. Monday, June 15th, 9 a.m., 2 days after the party. I sat very still and let the pieces click, because click they did, one after another, like place settings going down. Saturday. A golden hour legacy session, a wall-sized family portrait, a barn full of witnesses watching the Thorntons glow, attendance carefully edited, the Whitfields reassured, the engagement cemented. And then Monday, 9 a.m., before the flowers even wilted, the house signed over, the future notarized, the whole arrangement sealed. After Saturday, none of this will matter. That's what my sister had told me at the boutique. She thought Saturday was their finish line. She had no idea I was the one holding every contract they'd be celebrating under. Let me be honest with you, because this story only works honest. The lake house was my parents' to give. That's the law, and I never planned to fight it. What I could decide, the only thing I could decide, was whether they'd sign it in a fog of lies or in daylight, in front of every witness they'd invited to watch them shine. The party was Saturday, 4 o'clock, toast at 5, portraits at golden hour. The clock had been theirs all along. Now it was mine too. Thursday was the final tasting at the Orchard House, and the Whitfields came. Sandra in linen the color of expensive sand, Gordon with a handshake like a bank vault door. I'd set a long table with 6 courses in miniature. Grandma Ruth's ham glazed dark and glossy, her yeast rolls, the trout, the tenderloin Sandra had requested, and her apple stack cake sliced thin as hymnal pages. My mother swept in wearing hosting perfume, kissed the air near Sandra's cheek, and began conducting introductions like an orchestra. The venue coordinator, the florist, and then me, in my chef coat, holding a tray. "And this is Dana," my mother said, with a gracious little wave, "our caterer. She does all our little events. Our caterer." I watched the sentence land on Sandra Whitfield, watched her file it, and watched a small crease form as the filing failed. "Oh," Sandra said, looking from my mother's face to mine, which, inconveniently for everyone, share a chin. I thought, "Aren't you the sister?" One beat of silence, the kind my mother can produce on demand. "She's the food person, yes?" Mom said smoothly, and touched Sandra's elbow. "Brooke, show Sandra the orchard row before the light goes." And they moved off in a rustle of linen, leaving me holding my tray. Here's the thing about that moment. It didn't wound me the way it would have a month before, and that's how I knew I was changed. You can't insult the help when the help holds the deed to the evening. I refilled water glasses with a steady hand and let the room believe what it liked. Grant stayed behind, working on a second slice of ham like it required his full attention. "This is Grandma Ruth's recipe, right?" he asked. "Brooke never talks about her." I looked at him, friendly, oblivious, decent Grant, and said, "No, I don't imagine she does." Friday night, 8 days out, I finished building the folder. I'm going to tell you exactly what went into it, because the contents are the whole strategy. 1. The ledger. 23 family events across 9 years, dated, itemized at market rate, totaling $31,400, with my mother's signed handwritten promise clipped to the front. 2. This party's own invoice, $11,000 at cost, every add-on documented, from the carving station to the raw bar to the naked cake. 3. The photocopied shot list, Thornton Family Legacy Session, booked by B. Thornton, 14 frames, and the pencil note at the bottom I'd stopped needing to reread. 4. The St. Luke's scheduling letter next to my bank statement, $18,000 out, procedure canceled 2 days later. 5. The auditor's parcel printout for the lake house, clipped to a note of the appointment half the county already knew about. Quitclaim, Thornton to Thornton, notary booked Monday at 9. 3 copies of everything, in 3 craft folders, tabbed like a closing packet. Because if my family was going to treat me like a vendor, they were going to get vendor-grade paperwork. Then I wrote a single page in plain language. No speech, no adjectives, just the order I'd read things in, timed at under 5 minutes, which I know because I read it aloud twice to the empty kitchen with a timer running. The last thing I did that night was small, and I did it for me. At the office supply store that afternoon, I'd bought a rubber stamp, custom made while I waited, red ink. It said, "Paid in full." Not a weapon, a receipt. I stamped a blank sheet once just to see it, and it looked exactly the way I hoped my face would look on Saturday. I was sliding the folders into my work tote when headlights swept the kitchen window and somebody knocked on my door at 10 o'clock at night. Soft, with a knuckle. Through the glass, in the porch light, stood my father, holding a box of tomatoes. He came in, set the tomatoes on the counter, and stood there in his canvas jacket with the air of a man who'd been sent and also come on his own. Both at once, which was my father in one sentence. He talked about the seedlings first. Whether Lily had watered hers, whether we'd get rain by Sunday. Then he got to it. Or as close as he ever gets. Saturday, he said, turning his cap in his hands. Whatever you're feeling about your mother, and I know there's a list. Hold it till after. Just till after. He looked at the floor. Your mother's been afraid so long she's forgot what of. This party. We need this to go well, Dana. More than you know. More than I know. I looked at this man who taught my daughter to whistle, who fixed my faucet without being asked, who had stood silent at every table where his wife rewrote the record. And I gave him one door, wide open, nothing behind my voice but the question itself. Dad, did you know Lily's not in a single photograph tomorrow? The cap went still in his hands. My father looked at the box of tomatoes on my counter for a long, long moment. Red, ripe, brought as tribute or apology or camouflage, I'll never know which. Then he put the cap on his head and said, "Good night, kiddo," and walked back out into the dark. I stood at the door and watched his taillights all the way down my street. He hadn't said yes. He hadn't said no. And a silence that careful is its own kind of answer. It takes practice. That was the night I stopped hoping somebody in that house would choose us. It simplified things, the way a hard frost simplifies a garden. Sunday, I went to Elaine's for the part that wasn't hers to tell over the phone. Elaine's kitchen smells like percolator coffee and lemon balm, and nothing false has ever survived 10 minutes in it. She let me get one bite of coffee cake down before she laid an envelope on the table and slid out a heavy card engraved, "Cream as good teeth." New member reception. The Hartwell Country Club is pleased to welcome Frank and Carol Thornton. Sponsored by Gordon Whitfield. I read it twice. Elaine watched me read it, arms folded. "Initiation fee at that club is $15,000, she said. "I know because your mother told me." Couldn't help herself. Told me the same spring she sat in this kitchen and cried poor about your daddy's heart. She let that sit. Then paid the club by summer. I did the arithmetic out loud, quietly, the way you'd read a verdict. $15,000 for the club. $3,000 for a legacy photo session. Deposit paid in February by check. $18,000. To the dollar. The exact size of a heart procedure that never happened and a roof that never got fixed. My money hadn't disappeared. It had been repurposed into a membership sponsored by Gordon Whitfield, into 14 frames I wasn't in, into the staging of a family whose picture improved once I was out of it. I asked the only question left. Who signed the checks, Elaine? My aunt looked at me a long moment, and being Elaine, she didn't dress it up. Whose handwriting do you think pays for things in that house, honey? Your mother hasn't written a check since Reagan. Frank Thornton. My steady, quiet, tomato-growing father, who 2 nights ago had stood in my kitchen and asked me to hold it till after. Not a bystander to the fog. The bookkeeper of it. I drove home the long way, past the turnoff to Birch Lake, and I didn't take it. 6 days to Saturday. Tuesday, I went to see him. I picked the morning my mother gets her hair set because I wanted my father without his editor. He was in the garden, of course, staking tomatoes, and I didn't bring documents or accusations. I brought the country club card and I set it on the picnic table between us the way you'd set down a found wallet. He looked at it. He sat down on the bench, slow, like his knees had aged 10 years on the way down, and he took off his cap. And for the first time in my adult life, my father talked to me about money. Nobody plans to be old and poor, Dana. He turned the card face down. The shop pension's been gone thin for years. The house needs a roof I can't climb to. Your mother looked at that club, at the Whitfields, at Brooke marrying up, and she saw a lifeboat. For both of us. Somewhere we'd matter, people who'd look after us when... He stopped, started again. And I looked at you. His thumb moved over the seams of the cap, working. You were the one who always stays afloat. Since you were little. Tom passes, and 6 months later, you're catering the Hensley wedding with the baby on your hip. Some people you stop worrying about them. It ain't fair. I know it ain't. There it was. The closest thing to the truth I'd ever get from him, and it was so much worse than a lie, and so human I had to look at the tomatoes for a second. They hadn't robbed me out of contempt. They'd robbed me out of confidence. I was the daughter who could take the hit. You looked at me and saw a bank, Dad, I said. And I said it gently, which was somehow the hardest way to say it. He didn't argue. I kissed the top of his head, took the card back, and drove to work. 4 days. Friday was load-in at the Orchard House, and I ran it the way I run every event. Clipboard, checklists, my 2 best staffers hauling chafing dishes while I walked the room with the coordinator. Marcy has known me 9 years. I catered her daughter's quinceañera during a thunderstorm and once fixed her fuse box mid-reception with a cake server. When I handed her my amended run of show, 1 new line, neat, right after the birthday toast. A word from the caterer. She read it, looked at me for a moment, and clicked her pen. Your event, Dana, she said. Your program. That's the entire conversation. Regular people don't need speeches to know which way is up. On the drink station, I found a stack of printed programs, heavy cardstock, Brooks doing. Nobody prints programs for a birthday party, but nobody stages a legacy session at one either. Thornton Family Legacy, 65 years of grace. Below it, the schedule. Toast at 5, followed by family portraits, immediate family only. I read it, folded 1 copy into my apron pocket, Exhibit 6, and set the rest back down square. Home by 9. Elaine had taken Lily for a sleepover. Part 1 of the Just Because party, involving ice cream for dinner, a fact I was told about only after negotiations had closed. My house was so quiet I could hear the refrigerator hum. I ironed my white chef coat and hung it on the door. I packed the 3 craft folders into my knife bag, next to the steel and the good boning knife, which felt about right. Last, I took Grandma Ruth's tin recipe box off its shelf to bring along. Her ham deserved her box in the building, and there was a display table that needed something real on it. Grandma, I said to the tin, out loud, alone in my kitchen, tomorrow I'm serving your ham. And the truth. Both from scratch. Before we get to Saturday, one quick thing. If somebody in your family has ever treated your giving like a subscription they never had to pay for, type the word receipts in the comments. I read every one of them, and I want to know I'm not the only one who finally added it up. All right, the party. Saturday, 4 o'clock. The Orchard House filled up like a church on Easter. 96 guests, Pastor Hale from First Methodist, the entire garden club in florals. Ruth's old bridge circle wobbly and bright-eyed, led by Dot Hensley with her cane and her good brooch. The Whitfield table sat center right. Sandra, Gordon, Grant, assorted silver cousins, under the string lights, and the whole barn smelled like my grandmother's kitchen because I'd baked her rolls in-house that morning and glazed the ham twice. People found me at the service line all evening the way they'd report a miracle. Dot gripped my wrist with her small, strong hand. Ruthie's ham, she said. 60 years I've been trying to get that glaze out of somebody. Then she peered past me toward the barn doors, and her face did what faces do when a count comes up short. Where's our Lilybug? I said. Lily was at her Aunt Elaine's, having her own party, and Dot studied me for a second too long. She'd heard something then. The bridge circle had all heard something. I watched the question move from table to table among Ruth's old friends like a draft nobody could find the source of. No Lily? At a family party? My mother, meanwhile, was luminous. I'll give her that. You'd never have known the woman was 65 and terrified. She floated between tables in dusty blue, laughing at Gordon Whitfield's golf stories, one eye always on the photographer, who was quietly building his set by the stone fireplace. Umbrella lights, 2 rows of chairs, a backdrop the color of heirloom cream. Brooke checked her lipstick in a butter knife. At 4:55, the photographer's assistant started aligning the chairs with a tape measure. A tape measure. I dried my hands on my apron, touched the knife bag under the service table once, the way you'd touch a rabbit's foot, and heard a spoon begin to ring against crystal. My mother stood at the head of the room with her champagne glass raised, pearl earrings catching the string lights, and gave a toast I'd bet money she'd rehearsed in the bathroom mirror since April. She thanked everyone for 65 wonderful years. She thanked Pastor Hale for his guidance, the Garden Club for their friendship, and the Whitfields, a small bow of the head, for welcoming our Brooke into such a wonderful family. She talked about family the way brochures talk about lakefront property, legacy, blessings, roots, and branches. She did not mention the branch she'd had removed, or the 5-year-old at this moment eating ice cream at Elaine's, or the caterer standing by the service line in whites, which is to say she did not mention the 2 people in her family who had actually paid for the evening. Applause, warm and lubricated, glasses everywhere. Then the photographer stepped forward, folding his hands like a funeral director, and announced that we'd be doing family portraits by the fireplace while the light held. Immediate family only, please. The phrase went through Ruth's bridge circle like a cold draft. I watched Dot's chin come up. Chairs were found. My mother arranged herself center, Dad at her shoulder in the sport coat she'd chosen for him, Brooke and Grant flanking, Grant's little nieces imported for the front row where a granddaughter might otherwise go. And then, my mother looked around the barn, found me by the service line, and, as 96 guests watched, as her pastor watched, as Sandra Whitfield watched, raised her voice into that bright hostess register that carries to every corner and delivered the line she'd been saving all my life. "You can wait in the kitchen, honey. This part is just for family." The barn went quiet. Dot Hensley set down her glass. I looked at my mother. I looked at the backdrop with no room in it for my daughter, and I untied my apron. I folded the apron over my arm and I did not raise my voice, because I've learned something in 9 years of working rooms. The quietest person with the best information owns the floor. "Actually, Mom, the kitchen can wait. I'd like to give you your birthday present in front of everyone. It's the same thing I've been giving this family for 9 years. The bill says it better than I can." A ripple went through the barn, half laugh, half inhale, the sound a crowd makes when it can't tell yet whether something is charming or about to be historic. My mother's smile stayed up, but it stopped reaching anything. "Dana, sweetheart," she said through it, "not now." "It's on the program, Mom." I held up the printed run of show, the one I'd amended as client of record. A word from the caterer. Right after the toast. "Marcy?" By the doors, Marcy, the coordinator, bless her steady, unionized soul, nodded once. "That's the program," she confirmed. "To no one and everyone." I walked to the middle of the floor between the fireplace and the head table, where the photographer's umbrella lights made a soft white circle on the boards, which felt fitting, since everyone had gone to such expense over the lighting. I set my knife bag on a chair and took out 3 craft folders. I want you to understand what the room looked like from where I stood. 96 faces. The Garden Club forks down. Pastor Hale, very still. Dot Hensley leaning forward on her cane like a woman at a horse race. Sandra Whitfield with her chin tipped, recalculating me in real time. My father with his hands flat on the tablecloth, looking at them. And my mother, center of her backdrop, exactly where she'd always wanted to be, in front of witnesses. She'd spent months gathering this audience for a portrait. I hadn't gathered anyone. I was just borrowing them. 3 weeks ago, I began, my mother handed me my assignment for tonight. So let's start with what tonight costs. I read from the first folder, and I read it the way I'd read a delivery manifest. No tremble, no flourish, just totals. Tonight's menu: 96 guests, 4 courses, carving station, raw bar, naked cake. $11,000 at cost. Every dish tonight is my grandmother Ruth's recipe from the tin box on the display table. You've been eating her ham. I catered it as a birthday gift, which makes it the 23rd event I've catered for my family. I turn the page. 23 events, 9 years. Every Thanksgiving, every Christmas, every funeral. At the same market rate I'd charge anyone in this room. $31,400. Never billed, except once. I lifted the sheet with her looping signature, held it steady so it caught the umbrella light. When my mother promised, in writing, at her anniversary dinner, that we'd settle up after her 65th. Which is tonight. The room had gone so quiet I could hear the ice settle in the raw bar. Somewhere in the garden club, a fork was set down very carefully on china. My mother's face had begun its long journey from rose to bone. "So, Mom, happy birthday. Here's the settlement." I took out the last sheet in the folder, the full 9-year ledger, and across it, in red, the stamp, "Paid in full." I crossed the floor and laid it on the gift table, on top of the cut glass punch bowl somebody had wrapped. "Consider it my last gift." From the caterer. Her word. Returned in front of everyone she'd said it to impress. Somebody in the back whispered 31,000 to a deaf husband, loudly, the way small towns take minutes. And that's when Brooke came up out of her chair, wineglass in hand, hissing my name. "This is not the time." I looked at my sister, in her ivory dress by her cream backdrop, and kept my voice level. "You're right. The time was February, when you booked a photographer." I opened the second folder. This is the run of show for tonight's photography. It's called the Thornton Family Legacy Session. Booked in February by B. Thornton. That's the sister currently asking me about timing. Premium package, 14 frames, ending in a portrait for above the mantel. I read the frames aloud, slowly, because lists don't editorialize. Frame 1, Carol and Frank, porch swing. Frame 3, Carol, Frank, Brooke, Grant, Orchard Row. Frame 6, 3 generations, Carol, Brooke, and Grant's nieces. I looked up. My daughter Lily is in none of the 14. Neither am I. And at the bottom, in the photographer's handwriting, the instruction. Per B, no D plus L. No Dana. No Lily. I turned to the photographer, a decent man holding a light meter like a shield. "Is that your shot list?" He glanced at Brooke, at my mother, and then did the only thing a professional can do. "That's the booking as ordered, yes ma'am." Ordered. The barn took that word and passed it around. 3 weeks ago, I said, still level, my daughter was banned from this party. I was told, quote, "She's too wild, she'll ruin the photos." I let my mother's own sentence stand in the air of her own party. There were never going to be photos of her. Wild had nothing to do with it. A 5-year-old was cut from this family in pencil, and the story about the gravy boat was the cover. And then, from the bridge circle, came the sound of a cane striking barn floor. Dot Hensley rose, all 5 feet of her, brooch blazing. "And she never touched that gravy boat," Dot announced, in the voice that has closed church rummage sales for 40 years. "That child was on the porch with me, counting ladybugs when it broke. I told Carol so that very week. I'll say it louder now." 96 heads turned from Dot to my sister. Sandra Whitfield turned to Brooke very, very slowly, the way tide goes out. "Which brings us," I said, "to the money." I opened the third folder and set its contents on the head table, piece by piece, facing out, like a place setting. 14 months ago, I loaned my parents $18,000 for a heart procedure at St. Luke's and a roof. Here's the scheduling letter I was shown. Here's my transfer. Memo line, loan. And here's the procedure, canceled 2 days after my money arrived. Not postponed. Canceled. I laid the last 2 items side by side. Here's the photographer's balance sheet, which came to me as client of record. A $3,000 deposit, received in February from the Thorntons on Maple Street. And here's the announcement card for the Hartwell Country Club. New members, Frank and Carol Thornton, sponsored by Gordon Whitfield. Initiation, 15,000. I looked up and did the arithmetic for the room, though half the garden club was already doing it on their napkins. 15 and 3 is 18. I thought I was paying for my father's heart. I paid for this backdrop, and for the club where tonight's guest list was recruited. Nobody moved. Then Gordon Whitfield stood up, unhurried, buttoning his jacket, a man closing a meeting, and bent to Sandra, and his voice was quiet, but Barnes carry. "We'll call the Thorntons Monday." The Whitfields gathering their things made a sound like the tide of the evening turning, and my mother broke. Not into apology. I want to be precise, because you've met women like my mother. She broke upward into performance, both hands pressed to her pearls, voice climbing to the rafters. "After everything this family has sacrificed for you," she cried, mascara beginning its descent, turning to her audience, to her pastor, to the leaving Whitfields, to anyone still buying. "I am 65 years old, this is my birthday," and she comes here with folders. Folders. Of everything to be accused of, she chose the paperwork. My mother, wronged at last by a filing system. I let her run. That was the strangest mercy of the night, and the most useful. Every second my mother spent performing, the room got a longer look at her. But while she performed, I turned to the person I actually needed, the one sitting motionless at the head table with his hands flat on the cloth, in the sport coat she'd picked for him. My father, the man who brought me tomatoes at 10 o'clock at night and asked me to hold it till after. The whole barn seemed to understand before I said a word. Even my mother's voice faltered off into hitching breaths. I asked it quietly. In a room that size, quiet is the loudest register there is. "Dad, did you know Lily wasn't in a single frame?" My father looked at his hands, mechanic's hands, scrubbed for the party, nails still faintly shadowed after 40 years of engines, hands that had signed every check in that house since before I was born. The silence went on so long that somewhere behind me the umbrella light buzzed, and then my father raised his head, and he looked at me. Not at Mom, not at the pastor, at me, and he said, "We needed this to go well, Dana." That was all. No denial. "No, I didn't know about the pictures, kiddo." The one sentence a careful man permits himself, and it answered everything. The checks, the shot list, the club, the fog. My mother went pale in her way, theatrically, swaying, reaching for a chair back. Brooke went pale in hers, furious, cornered, doing engagement math. But my father went pale like an honest man finally caught in the one lie of his life, gray and quiet, all at once, and that was the one that cost me. I nodded at him. Once. The way you close a ledger. "Now I know," I said, and I turned back to the room, because I had one page left and I intended to be done by dessert. My mother found her second wind, and this time she aimed it at me personally, which everyone in that barn will remember, because a woman who will say anything eventually says everything. "You've always resented your sister. Always. You couldn't stand that Brooke made something of herself." Her voice pitching higher with each clause. "And ever since Tom died you have been bitter, Dana. Bitter. And hard, and this is grief talking. She needs help, everyone. She needs—" Pastor Hale rose from his chair. He didn't speak. He simply came and stood beside her and put one hand on her shoulder, the gentlest gesture in the world, and it landed like a verdict. That's enough. The garden club studied their centerpieces. Two of Ruth's bridge circle were openly holding hands, and I stood in the umbrella light and did not take the bait, because the bait was the point. One flash of temper from me, and the story becomes hysterical daughter ruins birthday. I gave her the calmest sentence I had, and I meant every word of it. "No, Mom. I'm doing this because you taught me to keep good books. I'm just reading them out loud." Someone exhaled sharply. It might have been Elaine, arriving late by the door, still in her church clothes, having heard enough to be unsurprised. At the Whitfield table, now standing, Grant hadn't moved with his family. He was looking at Brooke the way a man looks at a house he was about to buy after the inspection comes back. Then he took the flower from his lapel, the one matched to her bouquet test arrangement, set it on the tablecloth, said something to her too low for anyone to hear, and walked to the door to hold it for his mother. Brooke stood absolutely still in her ivory dress, in front of her cream backdrop, perfectly lit, unphotographed. Nobody was pointing a camera at the Thornton family legacy now. Everyone was just looking at it. I picked my apron up off the chair and spoke to the room one last time, in the voice I used to tell a hall the buffet is open, warm, clear, done. Please, everyone, stay. Enjoy the food. It's Grandma Ruth's, every recipe, out of the tin box on that table. She fed people like she meant it. That part of this family is still free. Then I turned to my parents, and I lowered my voice to just us, though just us now included 96 witnesses, which was the entire point. Monday at 9, you'll sign whatever you sign. The lake house is yours to give. I looked it up. It's legal, and I won't be contesting anything. But hear me on this part. I looked at my mother. Lily and I are not props you can crop out when the picture's too crowded and paste back in when it needs warmth. As of tonight, Thornton Table's family